unworthy of these realms. You're unworthy of your title. You're unworthy of the loved ones you have betrayed.
Both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are indeed unworthy. They are unfit. Neither has the character or the competence to lead this country. Never, as David French wrote yesterday at nationalreview.com, never before have American primary voters presented the general public with two candidates so manifestly unfit to be commander-in-chief. Never before have we watched two candidates lie so boldly and brazenly to our faces, and never before have we been presented with such a miserable combination of lawlessness, ignorance, and arrogance. In yesterday's so-called Commander-in-Chief Forum, hosted by NBC's Matt Lauer, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump made it clear that they seek power, competence, and integrity be damned. Let's begin with Mrs. Clinton's continued deceptions about her homebrew email server. She is utterly shameless, as indeed she always has been. Here are Hillary's comments about classified information. Quote, putting on my hip waders here. But the real question is the handling of classified material, which I think what the implication of your question was. And for all the viewers watching you tonight, I have a lot of experience dealing with classified material. Starting when I was on the Senate Armed Services Committee, going into the 4 years as Secretary of State. Classified material has a header which says top secret, secret, confidential. Nothing, and I will repeat this, and this is verified in the report by the Department of Justice, none of the emails sent or received by me had such a header. Close quote.
Bullshit! 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 You're not Hillary's in the plate. Bullshit! Let's go bullshit! Let's go bullshit! Let's go bullshit!
This has been her line for a year, and she knows it is fundamentally misleading. Every person with a security clearance is responsible for proper handling of marked and unmarked classified material. The FBI found that Hillary sent and received classified information on a system less secure than Gmail, and that any reasonable person in her position should have known that an unclassified system was no place for that conversation. Again, common sense. And it's not common anymore, is it? No ordinary person could get away with such behavior. And of course, Mrs. Clinton is no ordinary person. Just ask her. To make matters worse, she later repeated this same deception to a veteran, a man who had a top secret clearance and who rightly said, had I communicated this information not following prescribed protocols, I would have been prosecuted and imprisoned. This is no small matter. A woman who should be a criminal defendant is the front runner to be commander-in-chief. Because, of course, Trumplicans nominated Donald Trump as her opponent. But Hillary's deficiencies go far, far beyond email. It's remarkable how deceptive she is, even when addressing military operations. Here's what she said about her ISIS strategy. Quote, We're going to work to make sure that they, our local allies, have the support. They have special forces, as you know. They have enablers. They have surveillance, intelligence, reconnaissance help. They are not going to get ground troops. We are not putting ground troops into Iraq ever again. And we're not putting ground troops into Syria. We're going to defeat ISIS without committing American ground troops, which is another way of saying we're not going to defeat ISIS. So those are the kinds of decisions we have to make on a case-by-case basis, close quote. Let's put this as plainly as possible. We already have ground troops in Iraq. They're there. Special forces are ground troops. The enablers are ground troops. Our intelligence assets are ground troops. They're not merely assisting the fight. They are often engaging in direct combat. They've taken casualties, for crying out loud. It's hard to imagine the reason for this deception other than that she's trying to continue the present Obama fiction of fighting a slowly escalating war while still posing as a peace president. She's trying to appease her communist base while still committing sufficient force to roll back ISIS, and to do so in classic Democrat presidential fashion, hello, Presidents Johnson and Kennedy, she redefines soldiers as something else. There's more to say about Mrs. Clinton, God knows, but time is precious, so let's move on to the carnival funhouse of lies and ignorance that is Donald J. Trump. The obvious first target is, of course, the way he just keeps lying directly to the American people about Iraq. He supported the war. I'll say it again. Trump supported the invasion of Iraq. Indeed, on Iraq and Libya, his position was indistinguishable from Hillary Clinton's. But Trump wouldn't be Trump if he didn't supplement his deceptions with total nonsense. Here's Trump talking about how he would have prevented the rise of ISIS. Quote, I've always said we shouldn't be there, but if we're going to get out, take the oil. If we would have taken the oil, you wouldn't have ISIS, because ISIS formed with the power and the wealth of that oil. Just we would leave a certain group behind, and you would take various sections where they have the oil. People don't know this about Iraq, but they have among the largest oil reserves in the world, in the entire world. Who doesn't know that Iraq doesn't have a ton of oil reserves? Who doesn't know that? There's the narcissistic personality disorder. Oh, he knows everything and nobody else knows anything. Cutting through the word salad, it seems that Trump is arguing that if we held the oil-producing regions of Iraq, which are in the northeast and southeast of the country, that we could have stopped ISIS. Of course, ISIS is in the northwest part of Iraq and the eastern part of Syria, but I digress. And of course, ISIS rose in Syria after the surge and did not seize Iraq's main oil fields. Yes, ISIS was able to generate revenue through smuggling and operating some smaller oil assets, but American forces have already crippled ISIS's oil production. Besides, I thought a core element of Trumpism, if there is such an ideology, was that America was going to avoid indefinite and dangerous foreign military entanglements. In other words, isolationism and American defeat, which is indistinguishable from the Obama doctrine. Truly taking the oil would require a decades-long, large-scale occupation at force levels wildly above even the most pessimistic estimates for securing the gains of the surge. Men would die every single month. Is that what you're really for, Trumplicans? Just checking. And then there's his alleged plan for stopping the Islamic State. Quote, I have a plan, but I don't want to, look, I have a very substantial chance of winning. In his dreams. Make America great again. There's his roll credits. We're going to make America great again. I have a substantial chance. I have a substantial chance of winning. He's trying to convince himself, I think. If I win, I don't want to broadcast to the enemy exactly what my plan is. In other words, he doesn't have a plan. Because if he had a plan, he'd be boasting the hell out of it. He's trying to make himself seem like he's smart and shrewd, when the truth is, he's shallower than a kiddie pool at Munchkinland. Now, if you believe that Trump actually has a plan, especially one that meets his professed goal of destroying ISIS very, very quickly without committing any ground forces, then you're probably the kind of person who believes that he opposed the war in Iraq in the first place. You trust blindly. But Trump's comments about Vladimir Putin were perhaps even more astounding. Did he really point to the Russian dictator's alleged approval ratings as proof of his effectiveness? Why, yes, he did. He must have truly admired the old Soviet leadership. Those guys routinely won more than 90% of the vote. Now that's strong leadership. But note this exchange. Quote, Matt Lauer said, Putin is also a guy who annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine, supports Assad in Syria, supports Iran, is trying to undermine our influence in key regions of the world, and according to our intelligence community, probably is the main suspect for the hacking of the DNC computers. Trump replied, well, nobody knows that for a fact, but do you want me to start naming some of the things that Barack Obama does at the same time? In other words, didn't address anything that Lauer said. Tried to change the subject. This is the kind of moral equivalence, as we talked about in the last video. Sure, Russia is bad, but we do bad things too, that traditionally caused Republicans to rightly howl in protest. Which Obama actions are remotely the equivalent of invading Ukraine and annexing Crimea. Does Obama execute journalists? Obama's prime military fault is that he's too, careful, to be egregiously euphemistic about it. He has too often hamstrung our forces and decimated them with budget cuts and the like, not to mention the perverted social engineering he's inflicted upon the armed forces. Finally, let's end with one of Trump's most confusing statements. One that perfectly encapsulates his ignorance. In responding to a question about sexual assault in the military, Trump said this, and I quote, but we have to do something about that problem. And the best thing we can do is set up a court system within the military. Right now, the court system practically doesn't exist. It takes too long. Universal Court of Military Justice, Judge Advocate General, court marshals. What do you mean there's no court system in the military? I'm surprised he doesn't suggest, every recruit should be castrated upon enlistment. Yeah, they're all going to be transgenderized anyway, so that's just the next step. Trump followed that up with this. Quote, you have reported, and the gentleman can tell you, you have the report of rape and nobody gets prosecuted. There are no consequences. When you have somebody that does something so evil, so bad as that, there has to be consequence for that person. You have to go after that person. Right now, nobody's doing anything, close quote. These answers are, what's the right word? Bizarre. That's a good adjective. Surely Trump knows that there is an actual JAG Corps, right? Judge Advocate General. One that predates even the founding of the American Republic. George Washington first established military justice in 1775. Courts martial occurred throughout the Revolutionary War. But even if he simply misspoke, elsewhere he said he wanted to keep the court system in the military. What? The rest of his statement is taken straight from radical feminists' talking points. It's simply false that nobody gets prosecuted, or that there are no consequences for rape in the military. While there are certainly individual breakdowns in justice, the military has long prosecuted rape charges, and commanders and JAG officers are increasingly vigilant, sometimes even overzealous, in their quest to stamp out sexual assault. Yes, military sex crime allegations suffer all the same problems of sex crime allegations anywhere else. They're often extraordinarily difficult to prove. But unless we want to toss out the Bill of Rights, no amount of feminist or Trumplican activism will change that fact. Trump siding with the radical feminists. You know, you could almost believe that he has consistently said that Planned Parenthood does, and I quote, good work. Some say voters should just suck it up and pick their poison. Do you want the president who will maintain a more or less mainstream American foreign policy, more hawkish than Obama, less than Bush, but who lies brazenly, disregards the law, and is a walking impeachment risk? Or do you want the president who lies brazenly, cozies up to our chief strategic enemy, demonstrates extraordinary ignorance of foreign affairs, and threatens the existence of alliances that have kept global peace for decades? I say, pick neither one. Vote none of the above. Now is not the time for participation, or in other words, being complicit. Now is the time for protest. Not the Colin Kaepernick variety. The American variety. The goal is to hold either candidate in check, to minimize the damage for 4 years, then to reset the process, purge Trumplicanism like the cancer it is from the American body politic, and rally behind a man or woman who understands American national security and who would truly defend American interests. The current fight isn't between a National Socialist and a Communist. It's between a Trumpulist and a Clintonist. Two people who place their own interest above those of the country. We, all of us, should reject them both.